Chapter 6, Venture into the Hermitage. I don't trust Jeremy, declared XANA. Aelita sat beside him on the couch. Jeremy had interrupted the conversation abruptly when Mago's soldiers approached, and she and XANA were now alone once more. Aelita took the young man's hand. Don't you get it? Jeremy's theory explains everything. You and I used to be friends, but they hurt me, so I couldn't come see you, and then the virus inside of you was activated. Then, you lost your emotions and became something different. A machine. The machine that killed my father. Aelita felt her heart start to beat harder. She could only think about how XANA had murdered her father. He sacrificed himself to destroy this invention, his invention that had gone out of control, once and for all. But now you're different from the XANA that I battled against on Lyoko, she continued. So if you want, you can help us. How? I told Jeremy that we could create new robots to use against Green Phoenix, but he didn't want to. The young girl forced herself to smile. It'd be best not to alert the terrorists, at least for the time being. For now, we can spend a bit of time together, get to know each other better and catch up on lost years. You'll see, something will come up sooner or later, and we'll be back in action. She stood up. She was tired of being cooped up inside the Hermitage. Outside, it was a splendid, summer afternoon, and she wanted to breathe a bit of fresh air. Come with me, she proposed. Let's go for a walk. Yumi heard the noise of small rocks hitting the window. It was odd. Just like they had planned, he didn't reply to her message, but came at full speed. The young girl looked at her watch. midnight. The men in black had come to the gym not long ago and took the cases full of equipment before leaving. They were preparing for the mission. And now it was their turn. The young girl agilely climbed up the stairs covered with weights and medicine balls, opened the window of the gym and stuck her head outside. Ulrich and Richard waved to her. Wait here, she whispered. She climbed down the stairs, grabbed a large oxygen container and tossed it to her friends through the open window. She continued until she ran out of equipment to throw to them, then slipped through to the other side of the window herself. Yumi, trying to catch her breath from all the effort, stared at Richard. Well, she asked. Did I get it all? Yes, it's fine, the young man replied to her with a smile. It's not exactly the equipment I was hoping for though. These are military rebreathers. In other words, they function by recycling the air exhaled. They're very quiet and have the advantage of not creating any bubbles underwater. Wow, exclaimed Odd, always excited by anything out of the ordinary. The problem is that they're a bit complicated to use. I'll need to make sure I correctly explain how to use them. And we'll learn it by heart, said Yumi, giving Odd a wink. At this hour, the others have already dived in, I'm sure. Oof, exhaled Eva. We've been here for an hour, and I'm starting to get bored. Ulrich signed and looked up to the sky. They had arrived at the very edge of the bridge that ended over an immense, hollow cylinder that seemed to be made of blue rocks. The cylinder had no hand grips, and it was so deep that it seemed to go on forever. To fall from this height. Well, really, Ulrich didn't know if that would kill him or not. They were inside Lyoko, and on this world, there were no bones to be broken, only life points to be lost. However, who knows what would happen if he were to fall all the way down. He hadn't the slightest desire to find out. Hey, Eva called out to him. Mind telling me why you aren't replying to me? Do you have a problem with me, by chance? Can't you shut up even for a moment? Ulrich burst out. I'm thinking about what we should do. If we don't find a way to get down, we'll need to head all the way back to the first city. Eva sat at the edge of the bridge, her eyebrows furrowed. I shouldn't have to follow you and Four Eyes around. You're nothing but a couple of brats. With that, Ulrich lamented at how well Eva had learned his language. But a noise then caught his attention. It was a repetitive brushing sound, like the sound of pages in a book being leafed through at full speed. And it was becoming stronger and stronger. The boy unsheathed the katana that he was carrying at his side and stood en guard. His samurai sword was a blade so bright that it seemed as if a light were shining out from it. What are you doing? Said Eva while jumping to her feet. Stay on your toes, murmured Ulrich. They're coming. The manta rays zoomed out of the chasm. There were two large, white, and black creatures. They had long, triangular bodies that worked as fins or wings and that ended in a long, pointed tail. The creatures had neither eyes nor mouths, but two small horns that extended from their snouts. "What are those things?" yelled Eva. "A pair of XANA's monsters," replied Ulrich. The boy more tightly grasped the hilt of his sword, preparing for combat. "Don't be afraid. This time, the mantas aren't here to attack you." The voice that had just spoken was deep and seemed to come from all directions at once. "You're XANA," cried Ulrich. "What do you want with us?" "Jeremy is in contact with Aelita and I in the mirror. We came to a sort of agreement." Ulrich didn't know what to do. He didn't trust XANA at all. He was the enemy, the one who had put them through a lot of hard times, and against whom they had battled countless times without end. But for now, the manta rays had not fired their lasers. "I came here to bring you to a safe place," the voice continued. "Jeremy and I are about to come up with a plan to face the Green Phoenix, and your friend wishes for you two to help us, even if I don't see how you could. Thus, the decision is yours." With a firm flap of their wings, the manta rays descended from above them in a circle until landing on the surface of the bridge, in wait. Eva smiled, clapped for joy, and got on top of the manta ray closest to her. She grabbed the creature's small horns as if they were reins. "This is so cool," she cried out in English, before continuing in French. "1,000 times better than the horse riding classes at Meredith School. My friends will die of jealousy." "Okay, fine," cried Ulrich, unheard, while he sheathed his sword. "Take us wherever it is you wish." Then, he mounted the other manta ray. It was a moonless night, and the park at Cadix seemed to be fast asleep. Odd felt himself shiver in his wetsuit. He left the large manhole cover on the ground. Then, he stood to see Yumi and Richard. He had to cover his mouth with both hands so as not to burst out in laughter. Yumi seemed as if she had transformed into an astronaut. Her hair was tightly packed into the hood of her suit, and the diving mask was completely covering her face. Two large, dark tubes ran from her mouth to her back, like a pair of tentacles that connected to the oxygen container backpack. Richard turned towards Odd with a smile on his face. "Don't laugh too hard, it's your turn now." The young man repeated all the instructions from beginning to end on how to use the rebreather and helped Odd to put on the equipment. "Perfect," exclaimed Richard lastly. "It's a very short trip from here to the Hermitage. Plus, you only have to remember to follow me very closely. Everything clear?" Odd tried to speak, but his lips only let out a grumble. The mask reeked of plastic and made him feel like he was suffocating. While Richard finished putting on his wetsuit and gear, Odd focused the underwater light in the direction of the sewers. After only a slight drop, the sickly surface of the river could be seen. He had traveled with the rest of the group down these tunnels numerous times before to reach the factory or the Hermitage, but now, with the sewers flooded, it was more of an adventure. The only thing that grossed him out a bit was the idea of submerging in these stinky waters. Richard passed by close to him, moving his ridiculous fin feet like some kind of frogman. He then adjusted his mask on his face and jumped into the sewers, splashing Odd up to his head. A second later, Yumi did the same. Odd watched as his two friends disappeared into the small well, figured it was too late to turn back now, then dived in after them. The water was murky and freezing cold. In front of his mask, particles were drifting by that he thought were better left unidentified, illuminated only by his light. He felt as if the weights that he'd attached to his waist were dragging him down. He adjusted the life vest, Richard called it a BCD, until he felt it was adequate and then looked around. He wasn't able to make out a thing, not even the walls of the tunnel. Everything was too dark, and the water was very dirty. Odd needed to force himself not to vomit. He was lucky to have the mask preventing him from smelling everything. But the idea that this water was filtered in the wetsuit and that he was bathing in it. He finally noticed the lights, two small twin sparks that were waiting for him a short distance away. The boy moved the fins on his feet slowly until reaching Richard and Yumi. When he saw them, Richard raised his hand with a thumb up and began to swim through the tunnel. Yumi and Odd followed him. Jeremy was seated in front of the command post of the supercomputer, on the first underground floor of the factory. It was on these very screens that he had seen Aelita for the first time, and from here that he had guided his friends through their innumerable, virtual adventures. But everything was different now. Two soldiers from the Green Phoenix were posted behind him, observing him with glassy eyes, while he tried to decipher the codes from Richard's palm computer. Jeremy had consulted Memory's notes and agreed with the woman's conclusions. The palm computer contained an activation program, but there was no human way of understanding what it should activate. This was the most complicated code that he had ever analyzed in his entire life. It didn't make any sense. The boy took off his large, round glasses and cleaned them with the bottom of his shirt. At least, he had succeeded in contacting Aelita and spoke with XANA. Somehow, it seemed that his friend had managed to get through to the artificial intelligence, drawing him to their side. And he could prove to be a worthy ally. "You two, outside. You're distracting him like that." Jeremy turned around in the pivoting chair. The doors of the elevator closed behind Memory. The woman was clothed in her usual white lab coat, but she had a different expression now. Her eyes were encircled by small wrinkles from worry. The soldiers gave a salute and left, walking out as rigidly as two marionettes. Memory addressed Jeremy with a tired smile, and he noticed that she was no longer wearing her gold necklace. Aelita had said that hers was activated. Could it be that the transmitter had truly worked? "You seem surprised," the woman said. "Why?" "Your necklace." Memory's cheeks became the same scarlet color as her hair, and she removed the necklace from the pocket of her coat with 2 fingers. "I didn't want Mago to see it," she murmured. "I wasn't feeling well this afternoon, and I passed out. That's why they immediately made you leave Lyoko. But I'm feeling better now." "Oh, you don't seem so well though," replied Jeremy. The woman made neither a reference to Aelita nor to Hopper. The boy thought for a moment if he should divert the conversation topic to his friend. But then decided not to say anything. It could be dangerous. Memory had been working for Hannibal Mago all of these years, and he'd risk putting Aelita and the rest of his friends in danger. The woman pointed to the main screen at the commands. "Have you made any progress with the code?" she asked him. "Not yet," Jeremy responded, lowering his head. "I haven't managed to find the common thread. It generally just looks like a confusing mishmash." "Well, then," said Memory with a wink. "Let's just put that aside for the moment and concentrate on the first city instead. The castle is a powerful weapon, and it should not end up in the wrong hands. I want to study it carefully. Do you want to help me?" Jeremy nodded in silence. Odd was stunned by the deep silence down below. The rebreather made practically no noise, and the boy could only hear the inhaling and exhaling of his own breath. Richard and Yumi's fins undulated in front of his face as soft shadows. They had crossed a labyrinth that seemed so strange and new to Odd, much different than the path that he had taken by foot millions of times before. The circular sewer tunnel had now been transformed into a long, narrow passageway. The children traveled down it until reaching the end and swimming up, following a flooded staircase dug out in the cement. After that, the water level began to drop. Richard pushed himself off the stairs and raised his head, exiting the water. "Phew," exclaimed Odd, removing his mask. Another minute of silence, and I was going to explode. "Talk quieter," Yumi warned him. The Green Phoenix soldiers could be just around the corner. Odd looked all around him. The steps disappeared behind his back under a cloak of cold, dirty water. In front of him, on the other side, there was a door that the boy recognized immediately. It was the one separating the underground passage from bottom floors of the Hermitage. They were here. "This water stinks," he complained. "I'm starting to feel like throwing up." Before he could finish speaking, the metal door opened, and a hand holding a gun appeared. Richard let out a small cry and slipped on the wet steps, falling on his back into the water with a loud splash. "Don't shoot!" Odd rushed to yell out, while raising his arms. A face emerged from above the hand that the boy didn't recognize at first. The person was wearing glasses and had gray hair tucked in the hood of a wetsuit. "What are you doing here?" asked Professor Hertz. "Well, you see, we came to give you a hand." Hertz lowered her head in resignation. She helped Richard out of the water. The young boy looked like a scared puppy. Odd couldn't believe his eyes. The professor was holding a giant gun in both hands and looked nothing like the peaceful science teacher that he knew so well. She had been transformed into a secret agent. She had become Major Steinbach once more. "You shouldn't have come here," whispered the woman. "Actually, it's your fault," protested Odd. "Until now, we were the ones doing all the dirty work, but when the time came to finally do something fun, The professor threw him a frigid glare. This isn't a game, Odd. We have to face the terrorists, and these guns shoot real bullets. You should have stayed at Kadak. The children removed their rebreathers and the rest of their equipment, only keeping on their wetsuits. Soaking wet, they entered through the metal door and slid into a tight storeroom guided by Hertz, who, as they entered, remained guarding the entrance with the gun in her hands and her eyes focused into two narrow slivers. Inside, there were 3 secret agents, Ulrich's father, Jeremy's father, and the Ishiyamas. Everyone was crammed into their wetsuits over which they had put on bulletproof vests. Lone Wolf and his 2 partners were armed. "Why are the children here?" demanded Ferret. "Yeah, what are they doing here?" added Weasel like an echo. "Keep quiet." Lone Wolf hushed them. "They'll hear us." Akiko, Yumi's mother, closed her hand like a vice on her daughter's shoulder. "You owe me an explanation for this, Yumi. And it better be good." Odd realized that his friend was in trouble, and he rushed to intervene. "We wanted to take part in the mission. We know how to use the scanners, so we could be of use." Lone Wolf furrowed his brow, perplexed, but Odd wasn't about to let this stop them. They had managed to make it this far, and he was more than determined to participate in this adventure. Chapter 7, XANA's Decision. The Hermitage's semi-basement was made up of a long corridor to which a number of storerooms and rooms were connected. One of these was a refrigerator room that had not seen light for many years, which led to the secret room in which Hopper had built a scanner to use to enter the mirror and the first city. Aside from the secret passage through the sewers, the only exit from the basement was in the house's garage, from which could be accessed the living room and the large garden. Odd, Yumi and Richard remained hidden, waiting for the adults to finish a quick exploration. Professor Hertz returned to the basement several minutes later. "Come with me, I'll accompany you to the secret room. Michel has already set to work on the scanner to get your friends out. You'll stay with him, be silent and courteous, and wait for the rest of us to take care of all the rest." The youngsters nodded. The professor behind them acting as a protective shield, they left the tiny room and ran towards the refrigerator room. From one end of the corridor, Lone Wolf watched them, gun in hand. Memory had left to bring them hot tea and was now stealing a glance at the boy with glasses through the steam from her cup. Jeremy was 13, while her daughter would already be around 23 years old. Memory couldn't believe it, Aelita should already be a grown woman by now. The last time she had seen her, she had been very small, and throughout all these long years, she, her mother, had forgotten her. How could she have? Since she had awoken from being unconscious, Memory had received rapid glimpses, visions, of a past that she never seemed to have lived. She remembered a military base. She had worked there at her husband Waldo's side. He was robust, had a beard, and they had a daughter together. Her darling Aelita. Then, a soldier named Mark Hollenbach had kidnapped her, and, continuously on the road, had taken her from one prison to the other for many years. She had then been locked in a hidden cabin in the National Park of Mercantour, in the French Alps. She had then been stranded somewhere in England, and later in Morocco. The soldier, who had adopted the name Hannibal Mago, had forced her to work for the Green Phoenix, his criminal organization. She had rebelled against him, because all she wanted was to find her husband and daughter again. And each time, after a while, when she thought she would never make it, her necklace would glow. It was Waldo, telling her that he was still thinking of her and always loved her. She responded to him in the same way. It was a simple and silent method of contact that had allowed her to remain hopeful for a very long time. She remembered one scene in particular from this period of time. It was the 2nd of May 1994. Mago had forced her into a room with a chair and a camera. He had bound her hands and forced her to record a message for her husband. He wanted to force him to recommence work on Project Carthage for him, but in this message, she had pleaded for him to flee, and Mago had knocked her out to render her unconscious. Less than a month later, something happened. Grigory Nictopoulos had entered her room. For once, he wasn't accompanied by his 2 dogs and was wearing a strange pair of leather gloves with a screen on the back and long, colored cables leading from the fingers. The man had placed his hands on her head and she had lost her name. She had become Memory. She had lost her past, and from that moment on became Mago's assistant. How had Grigory managed to erase her memory of the past? Who was she really? What was her name? And why is it that for more than a dozen years, the necklace had never lit up, not even once, to signal to her that Waldo and Aelita were well and still thinking of her? Memory finished drinking her tea and placed the cup on one of the console screens. Jeremy turned to her. "Anthea, look," he said. Memory stared at him, eyes wide. That was her real name. Anthea. The refrigerator room was a square room with an enormous airtight door. Large metal hooks hung from the ceiling, and on the walls were large, empty shelves. Several ventilation shafts embedded in the walls served to cool the room using a gigantic motor in another room. But currently, it was rather warm. On the back wall, a brick door had slid up on invisible railings to reveal a tiny passageway that led to a lit room. "I'm leaving you here," Professor Hertz announced, lowering the barrel of her gun. "Try not to break anything or cause any problems." Yumi nodded. She still couldn't get her mother's look of reproach out of her head, and was beginning to think it was a mistake to come here. Odd had always been the slightly goofy jester of the group. Since when had he become a warped plan maker? It was obvious that if there was one thing he could do, it was get them in trouble. Richard, Odd and the young girl bade goodbye to the professor and ducked their heads to enter the secret room. It was a small, empty space, containing only a sofa and an old television. One of the walls had a large opening in it, made by the end of a pick, through which they could see yet another room with a command post and a scanner column inside, the latter of which looked somewhat like a shower cubicle. Mr. Belpoise was already working on the computer. Yumi approached, distractedly running her fingers along the surface of the column. Once inside, she could be virtualized inside the mirror or the first city. And she could free her friends. "How's it going?" she asked Jeremy's father. The man gave her a warm smile. Michel Belpoise very much resembled his son. He wore the same round glasses and had the same blonde hair, although his was beginning to grow sparser on the top of his head, leaving a bald patch. "Well, I'm trying to remember how this thing works," he explained to her. "It's been years since I laid my hands on a terminal like this one." "I'm sorry," Yumi said, returning his smile. "I'm not very good with. I'm sure that Jeremy would know what to do. Although, if you want, I could try to lend a hand." Michel offered up his place in front of the keyboard. "Go on." Odd approved, enthusiastically encouraging. "Yumi, get in contact with Aelita right away." It was at that moment the children heard gunfire. XANA was invisible. Ulrich and Eva were in a small clearing among the trees and the artificial intelligence was floating all around them. It permeated the air, living in the tree trunks so tall their canopies were lost in the clear, monotone sky, and hidden in the immeasurable emerald green carpet of the woods. And it observed. Its manta rays had taken the children to a clearing near one of the towers, an enormous candle planted in the ground by a tangle of dark roots. Through these Lyoko towers, XANA could interact with the real world, use its power to infiltrate the electrical network of any nation on Earth and deactivate or destroy it. Or he could even exploit its incredible energy to save the two children and bring them to safety. They seemed so fragile to him. They were talking to each other calmly, without noticing his presence. He could have launched an army of monsters upon them and destroyed them. With a simple click of his fingers, he could have reduced their life points to nothing and sent them back to reality. But he hadn't done it. XANA was a very advanced program, and he couldn't feel uncertainty or confusion in the human sense of the words. XANA compiled data, fed it into complex statistical matrices, ran simulations, and analyzed the results. And at that moment, however, the creature couldn't decide how to act. All his projections advised him to maintain his alliance with the Green Phoenix. He had to help the terrorists conquer the world, destroy all the Earth's communications and overthrow its governments. At the end of this destructive procedure, it wouldn't be hard for him to get rid of Mago and become the absolute master of the world. But this success would have a price. It meant the defeat and probably the death of Aelita and her young friends. And XANA couldn't accept that. This simple loss, such a marginal one, stirred something within him, blocking his logical processes with something that resembled rage. Could this be the virus Jeremy was talking about? Or perhaps he is no longer a simple and cold computer program. XANA condensed himself, uniting the matter on Lyoko to adopt a human form. Upon seeing the black-haired boy appear before him, Ulrich leapt up and slid his hands onto the handle of his katana. There you are, he exclaimed. If I wanted to hurt you, commented XANA, with a smile, I wouldn't have chosen this fragile appearance. He turned towards Eva. How is my young assistant doing? Well, thank you, the girl responded unsteadily. Excellent. Until Jeremy and I agree on a plan of action, you shall be my guests. If you need something, you need only ask. At that moment, XANA felt an incoming communication. It was coming from the factory command post, but it wasn't Jeremy. It was Mago in person. The boy turned to Ulrich. The boss of the Green Phoenix wants to speak to me. You can listen in on the conversation, but you must remain silent. He cannot know that you're here. Ulrich nodded and XANA stretched out an arm to draw a square in the air. Suddenly, a screen appeared, floating a meter above the ground. In the frame, they could see the face of Hannibal Mago. Pleased to see you again, said the boss of the Green Phoenix. He smiled, and his mouth opened, clearly displaying his golden canine teeth. Jumped. At his side, Yumi and Michelle Belpoise stood up and the three of them turned to the entrance of the secret room. Richard, who had stayed by the side of the hole the whole time, had his back pressed against the wall and was having trouble breathing. They heard more gunfire, the sound of objects being thrown to the floor and shouting in French and other languages. The alarm had been raised. The men of the Green Phoenix had noticed they were there. Richard! Odd cried. Run to the door of the refrigerator room and get ready to close it if you see an enemy soldier. Yes, Yumi, open the connection to the mirror or the first city. Whichever. We just have to get our friends out of there. The girl got back to work on the computer, helped by Jeremy's father. We're connected to the first city, said Michel Belpoise, shaking his head, but the scanner isn't picking up any human life forms. Yumi's fingers trembled on the keyboard and her friend ran to her side. Don't worry, he whispered. You'll see, Ulrich and Eva will be fine. I'm sure there's a logical explanation. Meanwhile, try to get in contact with Aelita. Got it, responded the girl, hammering her fingers against the keys. Odd stayed for a moment to observe the monitors, forcing himself to ignore the battle sounds coming from outside. He could hear the barking of dogs. Aha, exclaimed Michelle joyfully. I've just found Aelita. We'll have an audio-visual connection in a second. The screen trembled from the interference contaminating the transmission like a curtain of sparks. Then, the image cleared to show the entrance to the factory, beside an elevator leading to the underground floors. Aelita was with a young boy with black hair. They saw her lift her head and put a hand to her ear. Is someone there? She asked. Aelita, it's me, Odd. How are you doing? Has XANA? No. Everything's fine. I could even say. XANA and I have become friends. Odd opened his eyes wide as saucers, stupefied. Yumi leaned towards the computer screen. Aelita, we don't have much time, she interrupted. We can't find Ulrich and Eva in the first city. Do you know what happened to them? They're safe and sound on Lyoko. XANA gave them refuge, responded the pink-haired girl. Okay, Odd exclaimed. For now, we're going to get you out of the mirror. Get ready. Aelita tried to babble a response but Odd became distracted by an uproar coming from the next room. The Green Phoenix soldiers had made it inside. Hannibal Mago explained to XANA that a group of people from Kadak had infiltrated the Hermitage with the help of the men in black. The young man observed Ulrich and Eva out of the corner of his eye. They were seated on the ground, concerned and frightened. Was saving them really so important to him? What do you want of me? He asked the boss of the Green Phoenix. You could be a little friendlier, Mago responded, shaking his head. After all, we're now associates. Anyway, here's what I want. Create more robot soldiers immediately, and make them come out of the Hermitage scanner to help my men. Meanwhile, I want to create a little chaos in the city, to give them a small taste of what's to come. Make all the traffic lights on all the roads red, to cause a string of accidents everywhere. Cut the electrical power. Screw up the radio communications of the police, the army, the firefighters. Well, you get what I'm going for. I want Dido to know that I'm not kidding around when I tell her to stay away. XANA knew that this moment would have come sooner or later. In the meantime, he had tried to buy time. He had helped Aelita and, as much as possible, Ulrich and Eva, but he had not personally exposed himself. XANA wasn't even a person in a strict sense. He was a digital entity that was currently divided in two. The first half, the one in Lyoko, possessed almost unlimited power and the cold clear-sightedness of a computer, while the other, the weaker half, was still prisoner in the mirror, and had begun to develop something new, emotions. But now, he had to make a decision. Should he help Mago and become the most powerful digital creature in Earth's history? Or should he help the children by giving in to this strange human component that he still didn't completely understand? In a fraction of a second, the artificial intelligence activated hundreds of simulation programs within himself and analyzed the results. Remaining by the side of the terrorists would mean absolute power. And yet, no, he replied. The screen showed the smile vanish from Mago's face. My friend, allow me to explain to you how this works. I have more than one trick up my sleeve. Mago opened his hand, showing his palm. On it was a small, black, plastic box with a single red button on it, covered by a transparent cover. All I have to do is press this button and poof. Supercomputer extinguished. And you'll be trapped inside once again. XANA shrugged. He had already made a decision and, for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of calm, coming directly from the part of him that was listening from inside the mirror. I also have some trump cards, he responded calmly. For example, I can use the towers on Lyoko to enter your brain. And I assure you that it is not a pleasant experience. From the other side of the screen, in the clearing, Eva nodded firmly. So we're equal, XANA continued. Both of us have a gun pointed at the other's head. But that's not why I don't want to help you. I simply can't do it. This was absolutely false, but XANA now had to lie. Jeremy had asked him to pretend he was an ally of the Green Phoenix until the right moment. And, according to his statistical projections, that moment had not yet come. Creating robot soldiers is very tiring, the young boy explained. Lyoko's energy resources are still recharging. If you don't believe me, you can ask Jeremy. As soon as I'm ready for action again, I'll let you know. The final image the screen showed before dissolving into thin air was Hannibal Mago slamming his fist on the table. The airtight door opened on all sides and Richard was sent flying through the air, hitting the cement wall back first. Hertz entered the room like a whirlwind, aiming her gun at the other side of the metal door. The sound of gunfire echoed like thunder through the refrigerator room. Richard moaned in pure fear, while the woman continued to shoot without turning around. Close the door, she ordered. These words acted on Richard like a spring. He quickly climbed up the shelves, reached the hooks hanging from the ceiling and pulled on them, moving them. He then turned to Hertz, and noticed a soldier in camouflage uniform behind her, 2 heads taller than her, face covered by a black balaclava and a submachine gun in his hands. Richard wanted to yell, run towards her to help her, but his muscles were contracted and fully resisted the idea of moving. He remained rooted to the spot, watching with eyes wide open as the professor flipped her weapon in her hand and struck the soldier's jaw with the butt. He heard the cracking of broken bones, then the woman turned on one leg, hitting the man with the heel of her other leg as she corrected her grip on the gun, raising her arm and shooting another soldier approaching through the corridor. Richard, she yelled. The young man bounded towards her and helped her close off the refrigerator room, barricading the door with metal hooks they'd taken off the ceiling. They made it just in time. An instant later, they saw the furious faces of soldiers pressing against the small, reinforced glass window. The terrorists began to push and slam against the door. By a hair, the young man murmured. He noticed Yumi stick her head out through the small door leading to the secret room and observed it. Professor perplexedly. What happened? Where are the others? Asked the girl. Hertz stuck her gun between her wetsuit and belt before shaking her head. They were captured. The Green Phoenix agents outnumbered us, so they were forced to surrender. My parents too? Yumi asked, voice trembling. I'm sorry, the woman said, nodding.
A bunch more hoplites seemed to arrive, and soon it'll become an army of nothing. And things with XANA and Lyoko seem to be coming all full circle, and the game exciting for the most part. So I was asked if this episode was going to be scheduled, and I first had a couple of more videos on the back burner on my list that I needed to do, but I didn't check on OBS until the Valentine stream, where Ray told me that she didn't hear anything, and I checked my audio and fixed it on stream. So all that audio toward the capture before the stream were not captured. Yeah, so I'll be editing the stream into condensed videos, making it look like a highlight reel, like my other videos. You know, gives me something to do. So until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Comment, like, and subscribe. And I'll see you all later. See ya.